Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Industry and Esports Insider podcast, where I speak to people and personalities within the esports sector. In today's episode, I'm so happy to be joined by Steve Arhancet, who is the co-CEO and co-owner of multinational esports organization Team Liquid. We're going to be talking about, the state of the esports industry with regards to esports acquisitions and mergers. Not only are we going to be talking about Team Liquid's recent acquisition of Stun.gg, which own notable Mobile Legends Bang Bang teams Aura and Echo, but we're going to be talking about the overall state of the ecosystem when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. It's a great in-depth conversation looking at kind of the inner details behind a merger or an acquisition, and I know that you're going to enjoy it. So let's jump into it. Steve, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast to talk about mergers and acquisitions. But first, how are you?
I'm doing great. I just got back from Saudi Arabia. We are competing at the Esports World Cup. So far, so great. No jet lag yet. And Team Liquid's doing great. We're in a great spot at the moment.
Hopefully the jet lag doesn't hit you while we're doing this podcast. I can imagine the travel being absolutely crazy. As I said at the beginning in my little pre-recorded intro that I've done in the episode, we're going to be talking about mergers and acquisitions. And I feel like I have to start this by going in a little time machine and going back to 2015, I believe. And it was a merger between Team Curse and Team Liquid. It was a major merger, one of the first kind of big mergers, I think, within the esports space that we actually saw in that time. But in hindsight, how big do you think that actually was as a decision to have Team Curse and Team Liquid join forces?
Well, it was a major decision with huge implications and consequences. At the time, I was kind of presented an opportunity to either start an entirely new rebrand from Curse Esports and kind of DIY everything outside of Curse Inc. or merge with an existing esports organization. And I actually thought quite a bit about both options. I actually came up with my own esports team brand, and I had assets and I had a name, and I was ready to go. And at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I was thorough with evaluating other options for merger. And for me, there were a couple of conditions on merger. Number one, I wanted to work with another leader of that existing organization that I would like working with, that I would vibe well with, that shared my values of transparency and integrity and inclusivity. And if I couldn't find that, I just wouldn't merge. There was no short, giving up on that or making some sort of concession to that. After that, then it came into play the assets of the company, which is kind of interesting because most people would be like, oh, well, you have to figure out the value and appreciation of the joint entity and what assets are on the balance sheet and all those sorts of things. It's just not the way I did it. And so it was a short list of a handful of esports teams that didn't have a presence in League of Legends. And that was my major asset. So, I met Victor, and we're very different people, but we complement each other very well, and so on that first mark, it was, I was kind of like the charismatic, outgoing, gregarious sales, marketing, front leadership, BD guy. And Victor was very much behind the scenes, operations, data-driven decision maker, and so that complement kind of worked out really well. But, we shared a lot of the same values. And so I think that's what kicked it off. And that's a good part of why Team Liquid has been probably the most successful esports organization in the world at this point, was because of that decision. Yeah.
And how back then, I'm guessing because we've done acquisitions, you've done acquisitions and mergers, following that. I'm guessing back then it was a little bit more. Was it simpler in a way, where it was kind of like having that chat and having that discussion, where now we're in a lot more of a professional kind of esports industry, right? When it comes to making these discussions.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the time, I think each of our organizations was doing about $1 million in revenue. At that size and scale, you can't afford to bring in a slew of attorneys to review everything. Our books and operations, we were doing stuff in QuickBooks, and it was just so, I don't know, bootstrapped, I guess. So, there was a lot of just intent and not crossing all your T's and dotting your I's in terms of finalizing a merger or doing some sort of acquisition. We later ended up working with Reed Smith, which was a phenomenal group from a legal firm that kind of put everything together, from OAs and operating agreements and a number of other documents that we needed. But we kind of did all that post. And that in contrast to the recent acquisition that we did with Stun, which is Aura and Echo, which are Mobile Legends Bang Bang teams in Indonesia and Philippines, quite different. The scale and the amount of resources. I think our legal bills alone is probably going to be close to 100,000, I think, just in legal alone. So, we couldn't have afforded that back then. So yes, very different.
It's interesting though that I feel like we had in the past, like we had a lot of like acquisitions and investments kind of come through in the esports space, right? Especially early on from that, I guess like 2015 to like 2019, 2020 kind of period. And now we're starting to see mergers more appear, where you're getting these like different esports organizations kind of come together to consolidate into one. I mean, just some examples off the top of my head, you've got like Mad Lions and Movistar and Koi. You've got Giants Gaming and XL. I mean, I'm naming European ones because I'm just from Europe, but I'm guessing there's so many in North America as well. Why do you think there is that kind of trend happening then now?
I think it's a number of factors. I'll start with the first, which is a little bit with market cycles. And this isn't just necessarily specific to esports, but could be applied to cryptocurrency or AI or healthcare or whatever. And in cases, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Gartner hype cycle, but basically it talks about industries that are kind of alluring to the VC world and investors, and these industries get flooded with capital, and that capital gets put to work, and there's a lot of expectations set on the return associated with that capital being put to work. And some of it goes into agencies and esports teams and new games and developers and software. And you just see like all these businesses kind of like being built, and they're all selling a dream of like what they can achieve and the returns for their investors. And well, then reality sets in, and there's not enough to go around for everybody. And there are some businesses that have the proper management, that have the good strategy, that build real businesses, and then there are those that don't. And when that happens, the bubble bursts, and when the bubble bursts, the capital dries up, and it becomes really expensive to raise incremental capital. And when that happens, you see a lot of companies either cease to exist or, kind of stop their growth and kind of just maintain. And when you get to that bottom of that like hype cycle, and you're just about to like go anew, which is like these businesses like reach sustainability, and you're like out with the companies that were swimming naked, so to speak, there's a lot of merger and acquisition that happens. And this is not just in esports. This is just in, I think, a lot of other industries. And part of that has to do with, you have companies that are, set at a certain value. You have other companies that are struggling, but maybe they have good management, or maybe they can be tacked on or tucked into the business to get further faster or bring in some proficiency. And so that's why you see so much merger and acquisition happening based on this kind of market cycle that is what it is. And I think the second piece is that it got kind of expedited, at least on the team side, by the Esports World Cup, which was this kind of first ever event where teams would compete against each other, and you had to have representation in different games. And So you saw organizations that maybe fielded 2 or 3 games, like grow to 9 games. And so is it easier to DIY and build your presence in a new game, or is it better to acquire an existing organization that has capability in a specific game genre? And so that you saw that kind of like, I think, infuse a lot of activity all simultaneously with a lot of organizations, where you saw the bigger ones kind of acquiring the smaller ones, and structuring those deals in a way for growth on both sides.
Yeah, speaking about the Esports World Cup, it was a point that I was going to bring on a little bit later. But actually, do you think that the fact that the Esports World Cup kind of incentivized, and obviously it had the club program, which provided financial incentives to kind of push teams to either partner or acquire or, kind of enter other titles, do you think that it does also kind of potentially cause the risk where a team is entering a title now for not the reason of growth, but actually just for the reason of participating in that title, more probably tailored towards the partner models, things that we've seen through different organizations that they've done?
Yeah. I mean, you're going to see a little bit of both, right? You're going to see some that are purely for participation in the Esports World Cup, for points and higher prize money and club participation. That's not been the approach that Team Liquid has taken, although it can be approached by other organizations. I mean, we just value our time. We want what we do, either from a partnership or acquisitions perspective, to be longer term than just one event that runs a couple months. Like, if we're going to have our full executives on something that is going to be in a partnership or acquisition, like, this has got to be a multi-year play. And so for us, it wasn't that. It was very much building for the vision of Team Liquid, which is, be a multi-generational esports brand. Like, when we have kids and those kids grow up in a household where Team Liquid is being rooted for, and then they become Team Liquid fans, and so on and so on. So we're playing the long game here. And so that was a driving factor for us.
And was that the decision why it was an acquisition of Stun GG? Obviously, I don't think you're going to acquire a whole organization with Echo and Aura, or Echo especially, a former world champion in Mobile Legends, just for the Esports World Cup, right? This is obviously a long-term play. Was that why you decided to do the acquisition as opposed to reaching out for like a partnership for a short-term deal?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we want to be a global and dominating esports organization that is multi-generational. And so in order to do that, to be global, we need to have representation in every major esport around the world. And we already kind of built our presence in South America, predominantly in Brazil. We have Victor and all of what he had built in Europe with a hub in Utrecht or Netherlands, and everything that I had built in primarily Los Angeles, but in the States. And an area where we had not yet ventured into was Southeast Asia. And you think about the big esports markets, you're looking at China, South Korea, India, Japan, and then Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Philippines. And so what's interesting is that you want to be in all these places as Team Liquid, but how do you do that in the most strategic way that's fiscally responsible and also sustainable? And so what we needed to do was either build a model like we did in South America, where we would hire our own staff and set up our own Lilitada and, build a presence and drive commercialization in market, and then use that to grow in region. But when we think about doing that in Southeast Asia, it's like, where do we start? Like, we don't even speak the native language. Like, how are we going to do this ourselves? And you realize very quickly that the DIY model comes with so many risks and such a high probability of failure that it's better to acquire. And then the question becomes, what asset are you acquiring? And there's so many options, right? And so, it's very much part of, like, we call it the main quest at Team Liquid. So our main quest is just be this big, huge global fandom that is in every major relevant esport. And so in order to do that, we had to take steps over time to get there. And so that's why MLBB was very much like in that main quest line. And once we did all the research and spoke to all the different partners that we could have acquired or, worked with, Stun just kind of clearly stood out amongst its peers. And when we knew it was right, then we worked on trying to form the right type of structure to get a deal across the line.
And how does a deal of kind of that magnitude in a different country kind of work? Are there hurdles that you kind of have to cross? Because I guess to go for another example of an acquisition was going into the MMO world with Liquid Guild, I believe, in 2022. So that was obviously a lot more central, a lot more kind of, and not in-house, but it feels like it could be a lot more easier than essentially going to another region to acquire another team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it was incredible. It's still, it's difficult. It will continue to be difficult. There's so many components to it. You have to realize that most acquisitions or mergers actually don't go well for a number of reasons. You could have like the best deal that feels so financially worth it, but in the end won't be because of culture or management or, strategic fit. There's just so many variables that come into play when you're trying to fold an organization into the mothership of Team Liquid. And so, you only really figure out if that is viable and will work through just really deep conversations about a multitude of topics and trying to advance those conversations, before the deal is done to get an idea, a vibe of how things will look on the other side, and through that process with the executive team or the management team, you start to get a feel of not just like how to design the formula, but like how it is working together. Okay, we have this really challenging problem with HR. How are we going to have the local HR laws and laws in the Netherlands and laws in LA like fit and congeal into the master Team Liquid HR rules? And, and so this is, how do we want to do this? And we start talking about it and workshopping it. And then, oh, wow, this, we're this is feeling really productive, and then we move on to the issue number 90. We start like going through all these things. And when it starts to feel right, then you gain confidence that you can kind of move towards close and really put together something that will create value for all participants and stakeholders.
And how much is kind of, in a way, like there's a trust factor, right? Because with Stun.gg and that acquisition, I believe, I may be wrong on this, but I believe that a lot of like the previous people from Echo and Aura are staying in that organization and they're kind of essentially running with the banner of Team Liquid, right? How much is there a trust process to make sure that you have this really established brand that actually when this acquisition takes place, that it is in the right hands? Because ultimately, if it goes wrong, it will have the Team Liquid banner that shows it, right?
Yeah. I mean, trust is an essential ingredient in all of this. And trust isn't just all encompassing, right? Like the way that I view trust is like, I trust certain individuals to do certain things, right? And so trust is variable and contextual. And you have to assess trust. And the best way to do that is to start to work together. So like, for example, Victor and I made it a point to actually fly to Jakarta and meet with Chris and Dan, who currently run Stun or Echo, and not just like sit in a conference room and talk about topics, but like go out and have drinks and like, shoot the shit and, get to know each other and, our values and how we process things and kind of try to have deep conversations and figure out how people are wired, like how do you come to decisions? Like, do you use intuition? Do you use data? Like, how do you solve complex equations in business? How does your mind work? How does our mind work? And so when you do that and you do it enough, you kind of get an idea of like creating trust on certain things, and then realizing that you don't have trust in other areas, which is totally fine. But like, you come to understand what you can and can't trust in those situations. But it is absolutely essential, and especially for the Stun acquisition, because we're just not there. Like, I'm not flying to Jakarta. I don't know the local culture and customs. And so it is very much Chris and Dan and all the staff and management and leadership there, they're stewards of the brand. We spent 25 years building the Team Liquid brand. And that's probably our most valuable asset, is just like Team Liquid, right? And the awareness associated with it and what it means. So like, that can't be damaged. It needs to be maintained and relished and protected and understood, philosophically. So we try to do a lot of work to create that trust, and it's going to be a process. And it will continue to be, and it cuts both ways.
So this podcast does have like a B2B audience. So I'm really interested, and I think our audience will be quite interested actually, about what are some of like the major hurdles that you as Team Liquid as a whole kind of have faced when it's come to merger and acquisitions. This doesn't need to be an acquisition or a merger that is completed, but just in general, like what are some things that you would say, which like for maybe a smaller team looking to also potentially acquire other things or merge into other organizations, what are some of like the key hurdles you faced?
I think key hurdles, I thought that the financial piece, the deal structure piece was going to be a larger hurdle than it was. I think you go into it thinking and focusing a little bit on the financial aspect and like the deal structure, like how much equity, how much compensation, motivation and types of compensation, and percentage equity ownership and share type. And you get kind of like lost a little bit in that. And I think, I feel like if you do it with the intent of strategy and what you hope to build together, and almost like designing the end state, and painting that picture, sculpting that state together, and talking about it with specificity and detail, so that you can kind of close your eyes and imagine what that future state is going to look like in this joint structure. That kind of laid the groundwork for so much to be possible. And I think I underestimated that. I mean, I'm glad that ended up happening. But that was maybe a little bit of a mistake on our side, is like an overt and heavy focus on the financial side, maybe too early, like get the purpose down. It's like, it sounds so simple, but like, yeah, you have your mutual purpose, you have the Stun purpose, you have the Team Liquid purpose. And it's like, how do you define those things? And it can't be just boilerplate garbage. It has to have some depth to it, And so like spending a lot of time on that would be, a great lesson, and look back here, hindsight 2020.
Is it kind of like just thinking of the bigger picture of what this could actually happen if this does go through, as opposed to, like you said, exactly on the financials and kind of you're essentially looking at the potential of it, right? As opposed to what you're getting right now.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Like, and it cuts both ways. So even though we acquired Stun, they were also being acquired by Team Liquid. And so they needed to understand our business through and through, like every single different revenue line, the types of revenues, the consistency of those revenues, where those revenues come from, what clients, how long are the contracts, what's the margin associated with it, how do you view the different types and buckets of your revenue, what is your P&L, why did you structure it that way, what is your forecast and growth on top of each of these different types of revenues. Tell me the story with that. How has that looked historically? Like, I want them to deeply get that about Team Liquid, and I want to deeply get that about their business. And when you do that, you're kind of realizing what the joint is going to look like. How is your P&L going to flow and become part of ours, and what does that revenue trajectory look like in the new synergistic model? Like, oh, well, if we take our partnership revenue, like I'll give an easy example. Let's say I look at our partnership revenue. Let's say we have a partner like Honda, right? And we're like, okay, well, we are providing a bunch of deliverables for North American Honda. But, well, when I was in Jakarta, there was a shitload of Honda vehicles that were being driven all over the place. Like Honda is selling a lot of stuff in Jakarta, And so how do we then maybe connect something with Honda to go and provide value for them in region? And then how can that effectively affect your P&L? And so you identify these synergies and start to work on those. And so I think that was a lot of the where the value becomes obvious, and then you start to get behind, like rallying behind the story that you're creating.
I think taking a little bit of a shift into the next topic, I think one thing that you've made quite clear, and I think it's quite obvious as well in the branding, is this kind of global brand, right? This attempt to be a global esports organization. It's something that I think we're seeing a lot more now, especially as we're seeing more acquisitions and mergers kind of come forth. Another one is Ninjas in Pajamas and ESV5, I think, with the Chinese organization, merging it into one. Why are we seeing more global esports organizations start to achieve? Is that kind of like the next step in a way?
It's interesting. I always thought it was the obvious step from the jump, like what makes gaming so different than other professional sports? I mean, the obvious thing you point to is the global nature of it, right? Like, I have all my Discord buddies around the world that hang out in my little private Discord, like we all are connected through this thread of loving League of Legends or TFT or whatever new Steam game comes out, and these are individuals and people that you wouldn't otherwise meet, like where you live, and so there's part of it that is like esports is global, so esports teams should be global. So that piece, but then also you look at it from a revenue perspective. Like, I think we have the highest revenue of any other esports team in the world, and one reason for that is because we work with global partners. You rarely see us working with a partner, or it's less frequent for us to work with a partner that is only selling its product and services in one region. And the reason for that is because when you open up global budgets and we have a global presence, then we can provide services globally, right? Which means you can now do more with a higher value to the contract, right? And so you may have an esports team that may be generating $1 million a year from a partnership, where we may be generating $10 million a year from one partnership. And so that scale just allows you to do more. So there's that. And I think the types of games that are played will always come and go. Like one time StarCraft was popular and it's kind of died off in popularity, but still has its core fan base. And you got Valorant and League of Legends, and these are all kind of ebb and flow. And so it's important to like always be in the relevant esports. And that means that if those relevant esports are predominantly being played in Indonesia or India or wherever, like you got to be there because that's where the audience is. And you have to follow the audience in order to maintain relevancy with your organization. And so that's the way we've seen it. And that's why, global has been an obvious choice for us.
And it's interesting that you say that, because there was like a little period where there was this kind of not obsession, but a real fixation on hyper localization, right? We had with the Call of Duty League and the Overwatch League having like, teams from Atlanta and specific regionalization. Why? I mean, it has worked in some senses. There are some organizations that have done well with that and have really like found a fan base with it. But why is that not as big now as what I think was expected? Let's be honest.
I think there are some esports organizations where if they build an esports brand in a very niche region, I think like Carmine Corp, right? Like you see the fanatic, I don't know, like how rabid the fan base is locally. I think that can work, but you will always be capped at your scale. Like you'll be really relevant in a micro geography, but and that can be okay. It just depends on what your expectations and ambitions are for the brand of your respective esports organization. And I think for us, there's just a bigger audience play if you go global. But granted, going global is not easy whatsoever. I mean, it has its challenges for sure.
It's risk versus reward, right? It's like such a big risk to essentially go out of your comfort zone. And like I said, Carmine Corp, Koi are big examples of having that established fan base. Would they find it difficult if they ended up going to, I don't know, China, and trying to do that again? It is a big risk to do that expansion, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I mean, that's why you saw, I think G2, they really wanted to get into the US market. They probably saw that the sponsorship market in Europe is really difficult. And, a lot of different countries, a lot of different languages, a lot of different cultures, micro budgets by brands. Like, they saw the US CPMs and, they wanted to expand. And even that has been a challenge for them, but they're starting to get it right. And so there is a lot of upside to being a global organization, but it does come with logistical challenges, HR challenges, cultural challenges, legal, trademark. Even my finance and HR teams are always pulling their hair out. They're like, Steve, you did what? We're acquiring a company in Indonesia and Philippines, another 120 staff. Like, what the fuck? Like, we're already like buried. Like, how can you do this to us? We'll figure it out. So yeah, it's challenging for sure.
As a final question, then, overall, do you think that we're going to start to see less teams in the ecosystem? I think gone are the days, from my opinion, where you just see kind of teams suddenly get built and you have hundreds of teams going into like an open LAN event. It seems that the ecosystem is getting smaller, even title by title, as you see multiple teams in different titles. Do you see that as a trend going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the data that I am seeing, the audience continues to grow. Like, it's up and to the right. I have not seen one report that shows that there's less gamers. Like, it is obvious there's going to be more gamers. This is technology. It's ubiquitous. It's just part of the culture. So then there are obviously more esports fans, and it's been segmented, League of Legends one day, Valorant the next, what have you. On the team side, yes, we're seeing consolidation for sure. And I think that's honestly, it's healthy. It will probably still continue to be pretty top heavy, where you have like a handful of teams that maintain a majority of the value and their ability to kind of commercialize and really grow as enterprise organizations. And you actually see the same thing in other professional sports as well. Like, the value of the top 10% is just supersedes the rest of the pack. And so that will probably fall in line. And I think, it will help, I think, with fandom and people just aligning with certain teams. Like, there's a very different feel to FaZe, than Team Liquid, probably the antonyms of one another, it's like, and so, and then you'll have people that fall in the, in that kind of like brand identity kind of wheel, I guess. So yeah, I think it's healthy, and we're going to probably continue to see more and more consolidation over the next, my guess, 5 years or so. We'll still see quite a bit. before it starts to settle in.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you just about mergers and acquisitions. We could have gone on so many other different tangents with some of the things that you've said anyway, but I really appreciate the time that you've taken. Is there any final words that you say before I give us a final sign off?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And feel free to root for, I'm not sure when you're posting this, but our MLBB team, they're playing at the Esports World Cup. They just made it out of groups, first in their group. They just made it out of the first match of quarterfinals. So, a team to watch, and we got lucky. We didn't know where they were going to qualify. We're just like hoping and praying, and then they did. So it's one of those times where timing and everything works out. So
what we'll do as well is, depending on when this goes out, we'll say like they've made it to finals or they've won the tournament. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure, and for everybody else who is watching and listening to this right now, we've got loads of other episodes to watch. We've got one with like Twitter. We've got one with I should say X now, right? Blast. We've had many others as well. So do check out the rest of them. But thank you so much for watching.